right, I got about 22 minutes to talk to you about a whole lot of books that were written by a very prolific author. I'm sure you've heard the name L. Ron Hubbard before. Did you know he wrote some Old West Western style books? I was thinking about, Robin, when we had in the studio a guest from the Tampa St. Pete area. Remember Clearwater?
Yes.
The Golden Theater.
Yes, Golden Age Theater.
Golden Age Theater, and she brought us Joni, thank you.
Yep.
She brought us some of the audio books. I guess they called them pulp fiction in those days.
Yes.
Dr. Buck Montgomery knows a lot more about this than I do. He's a Hollywood stuntman. Some of his films include The Long Riders, The Sackets. Is that right? So
Yep.
Barbarossa. He was in that.
Yes.
Pale Rider.
Not Barbarella, Barbarossa.
Back to the Future 3. He's an actor in his own right, an artist, a storyteller. He had his gun shot out of his hand by Roy Rogers during a show.
That's pretty amazing.
How am I going to? I would need to always have. I need to always have something handy to one up my guests. I hate when they one up me. But,
Can you do it? Can you one up him?
well, I think John Walsh, not the famous John Walsh, but another John Walsh when I was in 7th grade. He knocked the books out of my hand in high school. No, in junior high school. Sorry,
I don't think that works.
The joke went nowhere. Anyway, good morning, Dr. Buck Montgomery. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning. I'm reading that one right now. That's not living up to the Roy Rogers story. I'm sorry. I tried to make it, but it's just not working for me. So,
I had my books knocked out of my hand. Anyway, so good morning. Thank you for calling in. Where are you right now?
I am out here in another sunny place, Arizona, towards Phoenix area. So, we're the other sunshine state, or
So we were worried.
State.
We were worried about John Goodwin and all those folks over there at Galaxy Press. How are those fires close to them or not?
Not really. No, they're in a good safe area and such where they're at, and right now, I mean, John's really safe because he's over in London.
Oh, okay.
That's what he's doing. So that's why he makes the big bucks. But they're all safe and sound, and thank you for your concern on that. Appreciate that.
The one thing that I have discovered about L. Ron Hubbard's writing in general is that it's multi-layered. On the surface, it's a story about Battlefield Earth, for example, but underneath there's a lot deeper sentiment or philosophy that's being expressed. Does that same thing happen in the Western stories?
You know, it really does. I like to describe his writing much along the same lines as someone like Louis L'Amour, who I got to meet and work with, Zane Grey, who I didn't meet and work with. But he writes basically historical fiction. So if you read his writings, you realize that these are a lot of fictional characters, but they're also blended in with historical people and times and events. So you actually get kind of spoon-fed some history in reading his books.
And I love that, but maybe we don't realize it. And that's the kind of history student I am, by the way. I'm the kind of student that doesn't pay attention to textbooks, but if you take that same lesson and put it into a story, I'm going to remember it.
Exactly, and movies have done the same thing. They've always done that same thing. I always tell people, I said, if history was more interesting, more people would read books than watch movies. But
I think he was a keen observer of human behavior and the things that motivate us to do what we do. And I think that's kind of key to what history is about. It's what motivated us to do what we did, and then to put it in the context of a story. It's almost like we become like mini human analysts or something when we read those things.
Exactly. I agree fully with that. And you've got to make it exciting and entertaining. And it holds your attention, and like I said, you don't realize it, but you're actually learning something. You're not just enjoying a good story. If you walk away from it and do a little research, in the old days, you had to go to the library to look these things up. If he mentioned something about the Arizona Rangers, you had to go to the library. These days, just Google it.
Yeah, right. Go ahead. And
you had a wonderful inspiration in your dad, and he left you with a wonderful quote.
He did. My dad was a merchant marine for about 6 years of his life. Traveled around the world like 3 times, and he told me when I was about 7 years old, he looked at me and he said, "Son, if you don't have stories to tell, it means you haven't lived life." And I think it stuck with me. I think that's why I've done some of the crazy zany things I've done. I could have just spent the rest of my life in front of a microphone on the radio, but I did work in radio for a while, but I made a point to do some interesting things. Meet people, tell stories, make stories, hear stories, retell stories, and that's why I think I got into the movie business and radio and doing things with some of these live shows that L. Ron Hubbard does. I mean, it was just great performances, but you got to have stories. We don't retell stories enough. We don't tell our kids to pass these things along. So I'm a real big fan of that.
In the film business, you are a collaborative team telling a story, and it sounds like you've run the gamut of doing things from actor to stuntman. Is there a favorite part or a favorite role that I don't mean acting role, but I mean as far as the job of a movie team telling a story, is there a favorite part for yourself?
It's not really a part, because like you said, it's a whole package, and it only works if everyone is on the same page, literally. But these days, I think a lot of movies, you can go action adventure just so long, and you lose sight of actually making a film. I'm very old school. I was blessed to have worked with on some things like The Long Riders with Walter Hill, told a great story, but at the same time entertained about the James Younger gang. I did survive working with Gary Busey. Proud of that.
Oh wow, that's an accomplishment right there.
But quite the consummate actor until he just disappeared for like 4 or 5 days, and then we found him, and we came back and we finished filming. So,
oh my!
Yeah, I mean, that's where filmmaking has changed. In the old days, the studios basically owned the players, so they had full control. These days, everyone is funding their own films. So if they want to take a hiatus and leave for a week and a half, then so be it. It's their money.
So maybe I didn't realize this. Are you one of the voices on the audiobooks?
I've never. I'm getting ready to do some of the audiobooks. I've done a lot of their live shows, which are just spectacular. If I know you mentioned that a gal out there had done one, and they were trying to start doing them at other locations. They have a beautiful theater in Hollywood, California. But to watch their performances on stage, it's a throwback to the old radio when people actually used to go to the station and watch a show performed.
Yeah, they brought a whole cast in here, maybe 6 actors.
Yeah,
and we had sound effects and music, and it was very cool to listen to them and watch them as they actually did a radio play in our studio. So it was a real treat.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah, that's I tell people. I said, if you don't, a lot of people have gotten away from reading, but the audiobooks, theirs are unique in the fact that, like you said, there are multiple voices, so you're not listening to just the author or a narrator read a book to you. So it actually, you close your eyes and you're listening to a movie, basically.
And are you trying to capture the feel of the classic Western in your new project, Best Laid Plans?
Yes, actually, it's kind of it's a film. We're actually putting together what we call a sizzle reel in the business, and it's, believe it or not, it's a story about a guy named Buck Montgomery who was out of true West history. 1892, it made the headlines in the New York Times, and it took place in California. Somebody asked me years ago if I was related to them. I said, I don't believe so, but we can check. Let's draw some blood and do a DNA. And so it's an interesting story. It's actually still one of the top 10 lost treasures. There's about $1.5 million that's never been recovered from this stagecoach robbery that Buck Montgomery was. He was a messenger agent and was killed. And so I thought, it reads like a book and a movie. So I thought, why not make it? I'm just too old to play my own part. So. That's a shame. Yeah.
On the Galaxy Press website, it looks like it's all set up for Christmas gift giving time, and it's a fun site right now. I hadn't been to it in a while, so I'm looking at all the Christmas theme going on here. Is the 32 Tales of the Old West sold as a package? Is that what's going on?
It's sold as a package. You can buy them separately too, but the package is, I mean, what an incredible gift. Like I said, it's for all ages too. That's the great thing. His stories are very Americana, and so I would highly recommend picking up those books. It's a heck of a deal, and you'll enjoy it, and you'll learn something at the same time. So
I love how your stunt career started. I love that story. Could you share that?
Sure. I was actually a Disney animator when I was there. 2 weeks later, I turned 19 years old, and I got a job at Disney as an animator. I was thrilled at it. Being young, you don't do things properly sometimes, and that would be, I didn't ask how much money I'd be making. Thinking you get a job at Disney, I'll retire in 5 years because I'm going to make so much money, and come to find out, $156.70 is what I made a week there as an animator.
Oh no!
And it took me about a month and a half to get clearance to go back on the other areas because it's like Fort Knox there, and I got to go in the back lots. I'd ridden horses since I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I went back on the back lots, and one of the guys, after a couple of weeks there, he says, "Hey, Buck, you ride, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, I sure do." He goes, "Can you fall off a horse?" And I thought he was asking me how good of a rider I was, and I said, "Oh, no, I'm a really good rider. I don't fall off of horses." He said, "That's too bad, kid. That pays $50."
Oh.
Well, yeah, and when I'm your man, once again, I didn't ask that question. Is that $50 every time I fall off a horse, or until you get the shot? And it was the latter.
Oh.
So because they got this young guy. Oh, let him fall again. Let's do that again. After 15 falls, I think back on it. I think, I bet you they weren't even filming those other ones. I'm thinking that's what happened. So that got me into the business. I had told my dad about that same age. I think I was about 8. I grew up near Knott's Berry Farm, and they used to do a little Wild West show out there by the train. And I had asked him, I said, "What are these guys?" He goes, "Well, they're cowboys." I said, "Well, I'm a cowboy, yeah." And he goes, "Yeah." I go, "Well, what's their job?" And he goes, "Well, they're stuntmen." And I looked up at him, I guess, and he told me this, related the story several times. He said, I looked up and I said, "That's what I'm going to be when I grow up."
Oh, wow.
So when I did my first gag at Disney, the studios, I called my dad, not on the cell phone. This was on that phone that had that curly Q thing attached to it. That was enjoyment in its own right. And I called him and I said, "Hey, Dad, guess what I'm doing?" He goes, "Well, you're a Disney animator. I'm so proud of you." I said, "No." I said, "I did my first stunt today. I did a saddle roll off a running horse." And there was this, I thought I had killed my dad. I thought I'd given him a heart attack at a much too early age.
Oh, no.
There was no noise for the longest time. It was like dead air, on the radio. It's horrible. And he finally goes, "Tell me you're kidding me." And I go, "No." And he finally embraced it. But every time I would do something, I'd have to call him and say, "I'm all right." I ran on top of a moving train during the Long Riders, and I've never done that before. And when they asked me if I could do it, I said, "Of course I can do it."
I remember that scene. That was a good scene.
Well, thank you.
Thank
you and stuff. Yeah. That was me. We only had to do 2 takes on that, so that was,
Did I pay $50?
I was thankful. No, I got paid a lot more. I had evolved by that time into the business. So, but that was one of those things where I was on the film to do what they call auxiliary stunts, and a lot of guys just do that. You pick up here, you pick up there. You need to do a stair fall. We need to do a fight sequence. We need to do a riding scene. And the director came up and said, he looks at me, he's looking me up and down, and he says, can you run on top of a train? And I just looked at him and I went, all the other guys are around because I was the right size, the right person they needed. I said, sure, yeah. And so I spent the next week and a half running on top of a non-moving train. And I didn't run on top of that moving train until we did the shot. So It was most interesting. It's one of those things. It's like, you're thrown into the fire and just, I figured, what's the worst that can happen?
So finish this sentence. Finish the sentence. If you're ever going to run on a train, be sure that you blank.
Don't look up. Don't look up. And believe it or not, that was the last thing that the director told me. He says, hey, Buck, when you're running on that train, don't look up, because they didn't want to see my face on camera. And I'm thinking, why am I going to look up? I need to find out where that next train car hole is at, and then I need to jump over that. And running on a train, I quickly realized that running on a train where you're having to chase the engine is extremely difficult. And because, number one, it's a steam engine. It's not like putting your car in drive and on cruise control at a constant 30 miles an hour. That train chugs and rocks, and it changes the speed, and so you've got to make this. Yeah, it was interesting, to say the least.
So how did the cameraman do it? I mean, how did the cameras follow you?
Well, what we did, we had a camera mounted up on top of the engine.
Oh, okay.
So it was shooting back this way, and then they had some other cameras mounted on the sides of the thing. Now, there are no wires. If you've seen the scene, Robin. So there are no wires attached to everything. That you're just running on top of a train. No special shoes that you wear. People said, "Do you have suction cups on your boots?" I said, "No." Like that. And these are very old train cars. So most people would never do it again like that. Especially a famous stuntman like Tom Cruise would never do it like that.
That's too funny.
But I had people when the Lone Ranger came out, which I actually turned down. I didn't want to work on that. And they asked me, they said, if you saw the new Lone Ranger with Johnny Depp, there's a scene where horses are running on top of a train. And people all the time go, is it really hard to get a horse to run on top of a train? I usually don't even continue the conversation there. I just kind of walk away. You figure that out for yourself.
You and Robin might have a friend in common. Robin, what's his name again?
Grady Bishop from Extreme Stunts.
Do you know him?
I know I've never met him, but I do know of him. Yes.
There you go.
Yeah, he's amazing. He's going to be happy to hear you're on today.
I have a friend named Spanky Spangler, what a great name, that jumps cars and explodes into things, and he's more of a daredevil than he is a stuntman. Most stuntmen.
How long can you be a stuntman? How many years into your life are you deciding that you better stop? Are you still doing it?
I'm still doing it. I'm 64. I'm still doing it. I figure I got another good 10 to 12 years in me. And I mean, there are some things that I may not do anymore, and it's kind of a misnomer about stunt people. A stunt person doesn't do everything. There's been not even a handful of people that could say they were like that. I have no desire to set myself on fire for some strange reason. I really don't want to take and roll a car 12 times. I can do that any day on the freeway. But a lot of stunt people don't even ride horses. The last thing they want to do is get on a horse and get blown out of the saddle, or get drugged, down the street by a horse.
Right.
So you pick things that are kind of your specialty. Train running wasn't one of mine, but it is now. It became one of mine. I've done it about 4 or 5 times in different things. So you just find what you're comfortable in, but in the same light, you have to be proficient at the basics. Stunt fighting, everyone needs to be able to roll down a flight of stairs.
That's impressive. Wow, very, very.
So it's fun business.
And how could you? I mean, getting back to the Old West theme that we started with, how could you even do an Old West movie unless you had a stunt person?
That's exactly it. That created the action. They knew that first and foremost, going way back. And yeah, you have to have the action. You have to. And the thing is, some of the old westerns, much unlike some of the newer ones, where a lot of the actors want to do their own writing. When I did the Sacketts, I was brought in on that to do the writing for Tom Selleck. And I actually met with Louis L'Amour. He was the technical advisor. And I asked him, I said, why? Yeah, I said, why isn't Tom doing his own writing? He says, because he can't ride.
Oh, wow.
And it was one of the first westerns that Tom had done. And he had ridden on a horse, probably on a trail ride at Irvine Park or something, but a pony ride maybe. But Louis L'Amour was very adamant about, much like L. Ron Hubbard is, about the authenticity. And he says, I want to know that if one working cowboy goes to see this movie, that he knows that's a real cowboy in the saddle.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that makes sense.
You can tell. And you don't see there's a lot of movies being made even today where, they're not bringing someone in to ride, or they're not teaching someone how to ride. Jack Palance was a horrible horseback rider.
Oh, really?
Horrible.
Oh, my.
When he did Shane, there was a scene where he was supposed to come into town, his first scene, and he was supposed to come charging in on a horse and pull up to that saloon. And he came charging in on that horse, and there was more air between his butt and that saddle. You could have driven a train underneath it.
Oh, my
and the director goes, God, they did it again. And finally Jack Palance came up and he goes, I have an idea. He goes, what's that? And he goes, I think my character would be much more intimidating if he just walked that horse in. And that's what you see on film.
Oh,
and
wow.
It was classic.
Wow.
So he figured out a good way around it. And he just, even Lauren Green on Bonanza hated horses.
Is that right? Wow. What a fun interview.
Yeah.
Gosh, Buck, thank you for being on the show with us today. What a fun interview. Let's see. We want to send people to galaxypress.com for the books that we were talking about earlier. And what can we see you in next? What's coming up for you?
I just finished a little film called C-Bar, which is a kind of a classic Western chase thing. I realized I've been doing some acting here in the last couple of years, and I quickly realized why I was a stuntman, because remembering lines is really difficult. And it's probably more difficult for me now because I've had like 14 or 15 concussions.
Oh, God.
So that's not making it easier. But, so it's called C-Bar, and then, of course, Best Laid Plans is coming up. And like I said, tell your listeners to get some Christmas gifts at galaxypress.com, and they'll love it.
Absolutely. Dr. Buck Montgomery, what an honor to have you on our show. That was a fun interview. We will take a little break. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
The weather is brought to you by myfwc.com. Safe boating is no accidents. Thursday will be rather cloudy and cooler than recent days, with highs in the upper 60s to mid-70s. Cloudy Thursday night. There may be a bit of rain, lows in the mid to upper 50s and lower 60s. Occasional rain Friday and colder, highs in the 60s to mid-70s, low 80s well south. Saturday, clouds and a couple of showers in the morning, then some sun in the afternoon, highs in the 50s till mid-60s. From the Florida Weather Center,